Hello, computer.
This is Hello Computer, a series of interviews carried out in 2023, at a time when artificial intelligence appears to be going everywhere all at once. Our next interview is with Seth Shostak, Senior Astronomer for the SETI Institute, the not-for-profit research organisation looking for signs of intelligent alien life for almost 40 years.
My name is Seth Shostak, and I'm Senior Astronomer here at the SETI Institute in Northern California, the Silicon Valley. SETI is an acronym, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So we're looking for the aliens.
And I'm hoping that a lot of people that are watching this will already know you, but I'm also hoping there's a lot of people watching this who don't know you. So how do you introduce yourself at cocktail parties when people ask what you do?
Well, I just tell them I'm the bouncer usually. I mean, I don't volunteer more than that simply because who knows what these people are up to.
But if they push you on what you do for a living, Seth?
Well, I just tell them I'm involved in SETI. Many of them have heard of the acronym SETI. They know what we're trying to do, and they're familiar with it from radio and television shows. So many of them don't require terribly much explanation. In fact, they usually launch right into questions such as, have you found the aliens yet? And stuff like that.
Well, let's launch it straight into the questions then. What's your experience with AI over the years?
Well, my personal experience with it, is fairly limited. I mean, I've never used it. I've not never written any code that uses it. But some of our projects here do, in fact, take advantage of the fact that there are undergraduates involved who do know something about AI and use it to try and recognize the kinds of signals we're looking for, radio signals, that might betray the presence of extraterrestrials.
Let's get straight into that then. So SETI, please describe SETI's relationship with data. I mean, you must have processed a megabyte or two over the years. What does data mean to SETI?
Well, for our project, it's mostly radio searches. We use big antennas here in California and occasionally elsewhere and we point them at nearby star systems that are either known to have planets or are close enough that, we'll gamble that they have planets. Most stars have planets. And look for narrowband signals that are confined in frequency space. They're one spot on the radio dial, if you will. And we look for those kinds of signals because those are the kinds of signals that nature really doesn't make. They have to be made by a transmitter. So if you find that, then you've succeeded in your quest to prove that there's somebody out there.
And in the past, was that a very labor-intensive process with lots of meaty humans taking care of that?
No, I don't think it was ever like that. There, maybe the first experiment or two involved humans, looking at the data anyhow. But the data always came out either on paper or on a computer tape or something. I mean, they're just too many numbers for humans to be able to really do the data reduction. I mean, the first SETI experiment was 1960, and that isn't so long ago. 7 decades, but it's not very long ago in terms of technology. So even then, the data were being recorded by machines, not by people.
Give us a sense of the pace of change. You just said about it being quite recent that this has started, but again, as you say, most people know about this. So, what's your sense of the pace of change in terms of technology over the last?
Yeah, the changes in SETI are of two kinds. To begin with, there is the technology, and the technology, which is, by the way, mostly computer technology, and that follows something called Moore's Law. In other words, the capabilities that you get per dollar or per pound or per euro double essentially every 2 years, and that's certainly true for SETI. So the experiments keep getting faster and better. So that's one change, that the equipment that we use today, we monitor hundreds of millions of frequency channels simultaneously. Well, that wasn't possible in 1960, but it is now. The other thing that's changed is the astronomy. I mean, we now know that planets are not unusual at all. In fact, at least 80% of all stars have planets, and the real percentage might be higher than that. So, in fact, we know something about the universe that we didn't know back when this quest began, and that is that there's plenty of real estate for aliens to be hanging out on.
Do you feel particularly excited, or is this just another week at the office?
Well, so far it's been another week at the office, but I'm hoping for a better lunch than usual. It is somewhat of an exciting time, I think, primarily because of the discovery of the ubiquity of planets, that there are planets everywhere. The other thing is that we've learned something more about the evolution of life and intelligence, at least the experience of our own planet. Life began on Earth somewhere between 3.5 and 4 billion years ago, when the Earth was quite a bit younger than it is today. In other words, it happened very quickly. You know, you form the Earth, and then very quickly you have life. It took a while for that life to graduate to intelligent life, but nonetheless, it seems that life isn't terribly hard to get started. At least on this world, it didn't take very long for it to get started. And that suggests that it's probably a fairly common occurrence.
Let's look at some of your current work, SETI's current work, and I've taken a look at the white paper, A Deep Learning Search for Techno-Signatures from 820 Nearby Stars, published in January this year, with co-written by 17 of your colleagues, I believe. A lot of detail in there. I didn't read it all, I'm afraid, but what I did see is that there were 8 signals that were flagged up as being potentially interesting to take a look at. Is that something that we should be very excited about?
And you find signals all the time. The earliest searches found signals. And in that case, they were probably radar aboard military aircraft. I mean, finding signals is not hard, not on the Earth anyhow, because there's so many transmitters, right? There's signals everywhere on the dial. So finding a signal is not hard, but finding a signal that's truly extraterrestrial, in other words, not due to the Defense Department installation down the road here, or due to orbiting satellites, of which there are thousands that still function, that's not very hard to do. The question is it a signal that's actually coming from deep space, or is it something from, our own society, which so far has always been the case? So finding signals is not the name of the game. Finding an extraterrestrial signal is.
And you have gone on record to say that within the foreseeable future, we can expect something along those lines. Can you tell us a little more about that, please?
Well, I have, yes, this was in a desperate plea. I was giving a talk in Germany, actually, at the time. A desperate plea to get the attention, to retrieve the attention of the audience. And I bet everybody in the room a cup of coffee that we would find ET by 2035. That's based largely on the rapid improvement in the capabilities of the experiment, that we can, look over, as I say, hundreds of millions of channels simultaneously, as opposed to the early experiment, which looked at one channel. So this march of technology, prompted me to at least wager a cup of coffee that we would find something within the next 20 years. And I still stand by that, as long as not too many people come to my door asking for coffee 10 years from now.
How might we go from not knowing that there are aliens to knowing that there are aliens?
Well, if you pick up a signal, right, and it's a radio signal, and you pick it up when you point in the direction of a particular star system, say one that's relatively close, less than 100 light years away, right? The first thing you do is you say, okay, I'm picking up a signal looking in that direction, and now just swing the antenna a little bit off to the side and see if the signal goes away, which it should if it's really coming from that star system, but won't if it's coming from an orbiting satellite, for example. So you do some very simple tests. In fact, you don't even have to do them. The software does all that for you, and just tries to make sure that the signal that you found is truly extraterrestrial and not just interference, because, of course, there's an enormous amount of radio interference here on Earth.
And do you feel that machine learning and AI is going to play an important part in this, a crucial part in this, or will it still be a human that finds the aliens?
Well, in the end, there's a human who's being paid to look, so the humans will take the credit whether they should get it or not. But in fact, AI does offer the ability to more quickly decide if a signal is worth your time or not. And so it speeds up the search. And that's a good thing. I mean, if you're, on a South Pacific island looking for buried treasure, right? If you can do it with a shovel instead of a teaspoon, you're likely to find the treasure, if there is any. You're likely to find it more sooner rather than later. So that's what all these technical improvements really boil down to, the fact that the experiment can move along more quickly. And if there's something to be found, and I do believe there is stuff to be found, that seems like a reasonable assumption, then we'll find it sooner. It'll be a little more gratifying for those of us who are strutting and fretting planet Earth today.
If machine learning provides a shovel on the beach, just more power and just more time and Moore's law means that we're going to have many shovels and then eventually an earth digger and then eventually is it just a matter of scale, Matt? Is it when, not if?
That depends on your personal philosophies. I mean, there's no way to prove that there's life out there until you've found it. So, I can say, yes, it must be out there. Otherwise, there's something very special about our planet, which, that's always a dangerous argument to say there's something special about your situation. So assuming that there's not something special, then the speeding up the experiment, of course, will speed up, will give us an earlier date for success.
Some people, including the late Stephen Hawking, have said that there is an argument for us not to be communicating with potentially dangerous aliens. Elon Musk and a number of other people have said that we shouldn't be developing AI beyond ChatGPT 4. Are there any similarities there?
I don't know that there are. I mean, I do think that generalized artificial intelligence, right, the kind of AI that can be applied essentially to any task that you could apply your brain to, that might eventually have unforeseen and not necessarily positive consequences, right? Because what we're doing is we're inventing our successors, right? Because the machines, I mean, they're not cursed with things like, mortality and so forth. So if you invent machines that are smarter than we are, which is, certainly not impossible during the course of this century, maybe even sooner than the mid-century, if you do that, what are the consequences for us, right? It's like saying, well, what are the consequences for, the dinosaurs once mammals really got going? I mean, it didn't affect the dinosaurs necessarily directly, but they were no longer kings of the hill. And that undoubtedly will occur with us, too, that we will invent machines that can, do the Sunday crosswords a lot more quickly than we can.
Is there a sense of optimism or pessimism in your community?
Around AI, listen, it's already being coded into our software, so I guess that's optimism. I mean, it's just a tool, right? It's something that can help. It's not like the AI you see in the movies where the machines talk to you and say, I can't do that, Dave, or whatever. It's just another tool.
Let's talk about pop culture, as you mentioned that, because Klaatu Barada-Nikto, I believe that you were a science advisor on The Day the Earth Stood Still, 2008.
Yeah, the remake. Yeah. It wasn't quite as good as the original, which was in the 1950s.
How did you put them on the right track? What were they going to get wrong until you said, no, this is how it goes?
Nothing, right? They don't listen to me. I do consult for films occasionally, but, what's important in a film is not scientific accuracy, right? I mean, they'll take into consideration whatever commentary you want to make on either the script or the story idea or whatever. And if it doesn't interfere with the storytelling, they might adopt it. But that's not their number one goal. Their number one goal is to get people to buy movie tickets. And that means it's got to be a good story with strong characters. And none of that has terribly much to do with science.
Why do you think they employ advisors like you then, Seth? Why do you think that that's a thing?
Well, they don't actually employ you. They will have you volunteer.
Tolerate you.
Yeah. They will, because very often they're just stuck. That, for example, they might require a rocket ship filled with humans or whatever to go behind the moon and to be out of touch with the Earth for, 20 minutes or whatever it takes. And they need to have something happen there, but they can't think of a technical excuse for what they want to happen, whereas a scientist might be able to help them out. So you help them write the script, fundamentally.
You're a Trekkie, though, as well, I believe.
Well, I was certainly keen on the original Star Trek because it was a big show when I was still a student. So
And I'm a big believer in pop culture influencing and being influenced by society. I don't know if that's something that you agree with, but any lessons from Star Trek that are important for society these days?
Well, one thing is, if you just happen to be a yeoman, just another crew member, you never want to be the one they choose to send down to some planet because you're never going to come back. That was one thing I learned. But yeah, I mean, I certainly enjoyed the story. Some of them were quite imaginative. I met a couple of the writers. Well, I've met some of the stars too. I've been on stage with William Shatner and people like that. And, it's a lot of fun. But it's not science. Of course it's not science. It's entertainment.
So how many planets have the ability to tune into the first episode of Star Trek? How many planets will our culture have reached to date?
It's thousands, put it that way. And in fact, if you just do the calculation, our early television transmissions, the early radio was really at what they call middle wave frequencies in Europe. And that doesn't really make it through the ionosphere. But the early television, I mean, we had a television, my parents had a television in 1948, right? So we had a television fairly early. And those transmitters are powerful. They're aimed at the horizon. Those are the kinds of things that somebody could pick up if they had a big enough receiving antenna. And so, how long has it been since 1948? Well, 75 years or something like that. So those signals are 75 light years out there. And within 75 light years, there are many, many hundreds, even thousands of star systems. So we could potentially have a big audience for our early television.
And the computers that we see in popular culture, in things like Star Trek and various things, they don't have much. They talk and they respond to questions, but they sometimes don't have personalities. Sometimes they do have personalities. With AI the way that it's going, what happens when computers do have personalities that human beings can perhaps forge relationships with?
Yeah, well, I think you're going to see the same sort of thing that occurs with your pet. You may have a dog or a cat at home, and no pet owner would deny that their pets have personalities, right? But what does that mean? Does it mean you take them to the movies on the weekend? I mean, do you go out to dinner with them? I mean, you treat them differently than you treat the house plants you might have. But I think that the difference that we will encounter in this century when we have generalized artificial intelligence, right? It's not a machine that can beat you at chess, although it could certainly do that. But it's a machine that can, in fact, do your job. If your job involves sitting at a desk somewhere, it can do your job better than you can. And that's fundamentally different than anything that's happened in the 300,000-year history of Homo sapiens. So I think it's quite hard to know what that will result in. It might not be altogether good. Who knows?
But it is a fundamental change. It is a different thing that's happening at the moment.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Okay. What's your take on the Turing test? Is it now not required? Was it never required? Was it always misunderstood? Where does this leave the Turing test?
I don't know that it was ever required by anybody. Maybe Alan Turing required it of, his relatives. I don't know. It was just a sort of a straw man test on how you might, in fact, determine whether something on the other side of a door or something was intelligent or not, right? If you can converse with it, ask it questions, whatever, and you can't decide whether what's behind the door is, another person or just some sort of machine. If you can't distinguish those, then it's whatever it is, it's intelligent. And that includes the case where it's a machine. It's a sort of a nice way of defining intelligence. There really aren't very many good definitions for intelligence. I mean, we say dolphins are smart, right? But on what basis do we say that? Well, it's sort of the flexibility of their behavior, the fact that they can, be inventive, creative, and that sort of thing. But it's very hard to quantify.
You've said that dolphins are everyone's favorite because they've always got the smile.
Yeah, they do smile a lot, it seems.
Yeah. Yes. They know something that we don't know.
Well, only to Douglas Adams. I don't know that they know something we don't know unless it amounts to, collecting a lot of fish. They seem good at that.
What about intelligence here on Earth outside of humans? Is that something that we should be looking at? Should we be talking to the dolphins? Should we be talking to the crows and the gorillas?
Well, there are plenty of researchers who do that, of course. So, and even trying to determine whether they have a language, right? Okay, they're making noises. Your dog makes noises, but does it have a language, right? And that requires sort of analyzing the noises it makes and looking for redundancy and what order redundancy it is, how redundant is what they're, barking at you is. And if there's a, fair amount of redundancy, you can say, well, it has the structure of a language. So, we can just call it a language and the dogs won't disagree.
If I say von Neumann probes, and I hope I pronounced that right, can you tell us how that might mean alien AI will come our way? Is that a thing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it might be a thing. Von Neumann probes are simply machines that can build copies of themselves. In other words, they can reproduce. We don't really have, I don't think we have any machines that can do that, right? I mean, they can't, mine the metals and smelt them and whatever and, use machine tools on them to produce something or to develop electronics and so forth. We don't have machines that can do that without our help. But that might not stay. That situation may change. It may be that we build machines that can reproduce, and that's a little bit dangerous, as many people have pointed out, because the machines might just run amok. Their only goal is to make more of themselves, which seems to be the goal of most of my high school buddies these days. They might just be doing that, and they just burn up all the resources that are locally available, making copies of themselves to no particular purpose other than the fact that it's a behavior that reproduces itself. The behavior reproduces.
And should we be on the lookout for alien AI coming our way? If AI is an emergent property of neural networks or wetware or hardware, is alien AI the most likely thing that we're going to encounter rather than actual little green men?
Well, that's a matter of opinion more than anything else, because we haven't met any of it yet. But it does seem to me that, once you develop life, eventually, if you wait 4 billion years, you get intelligence, right? And once you have intelligence, I mean, maybe that it has so many advantages. I mean, look, we have, 3-pound brains. They're okay, for getting along at the at the local restaurants and so forth. But, they're obviously very limited. And if you had a 100-pound brain, maybe you could do a lot more. And with AI, you can do that because you're not limited to what can fit inside a skull. So, that's clearly the way intelligence will go in the future. It'll be, made more efficient, able to make better copies of itself more quickly and so forth. So that's undoubtedly our future. It's only taken 4 billion years to get to where we are now, but maybe only 50 more years to go to the next step.
That's great. We have to wait another 4 billion years. That's terrific to hear. So UAPs, UFOs, what is this a language thing? I mean, what is it something we should be concerned about or even bothered about? The fact that UFOs have become UAPs?
Well, that's just nomenclature, of course. But I don't know that we need to be concerned about it. A lot of people are. And in particular, a lot of people make their living by talking about UAPs, writing books about them and so forth. I don't think we're being visited. I think if Earth were being visited, we would know that, in the same way that the Native Americans knew when the Europeans began visiting North America. They would know it. I mean, it's pretty obvious. You don't require sophisticated technology to see that there's a whole bunch of strange-looking animals, people, whatever they are, down the road there. So, I also think when people say, well, what would the aliens look like? In the movies, they always look like us, fundamentally. They have heads and bodies and usually 2 arms, 2 legs, that kind of thing. And if they're malevolent aliens, which makes for a stronger storyline, of course, they usually look pretty ugly to us, although maybe to other aliens they don't look so ugly. But, all of that's in the realm of fiction. That's just some human's imagination. The real aliens, I think, indeed would most likely, the ones that we would hear from, would be more advanced technically than we are. Otherwise, we're not going to hear from them. And in that case, they may have already moved on to synthetic intelligence. Yeah. Not made of protoplasm, but made out of, silicon or germanium or some other semiconductor.
Now, I understand that there's a bottle of champagne on ice at all times for the moment that perhaps you guys know for certain, but you have also said that before then you'd expect the less disciplined members of the media to be already covering the story. How does this work in 2023 with social media and 4chan and just so much out there? I mean, the world would know about this before some of your colleagues would know about this, is what it sounds like.
If we were to find proof that the aliens are out there, yes, that would be something that that would be a big story, and it would be, all over the news, and you'd read about it probably first in the least reputable news outlets because, they don't necessarily worry about whether there's real confirmation of what they're writing or anything like that. So I think that if we do find the aliens in the earliest days when nobody's quite sure what we found, that will be a story that you'll read in the checkout line at your local supermarket. That's what I think that's quite likely. Rupert Murdoch will have exclusive rights.
He'll be very pleased to hear that, I'm sure. Might make up for the Fox situation.
Yeah.
So the way that AI is being covered at the moment, is AI a dry run for ET? Is the way that AI is being discussed in the media, isn't being discussed in the media, kind of the way that we can expect it when we're talking about aliens?
Well, I don't know. There seem to be different narratives. I mean, most of the articles I see in the popular press about AI are discussing, what can it do that we can't? What jobs will it make redundant, as they say in the UK? And, anything that you can do at a desk, I suppose is something that the machines can do. Is that scary? Yeah, probably it is scary. I try not to get scared by it, but yeah, but that is conflated with aliens, the alien hypothesis, because aliens also are assumed to be more advanced than we are. And it's certainly true that any that we would ever hear from, or let alone meet, they would have to be more technically advanced than we are. Otherwise, we won't meet them, we won't hear from them. So if they're more technically advanced, then we sort of assume they're machines. It all seems very straightforward and relevant to me. I think, the aliens won't be little green guys. They're going to be, little machines.
I was a very proud user of SETI at Home on my eMac back in the day. And so tell me, what was SETI at Home and what were the results of that?
Well, it wasn't our project, right? So I can only comment third hand about it. But it was developed, the idea actually occurred to a fellow up in the Seattle, Washington area. And he convinced some people eventually at the University of California, Berkeley, which is about 50 miles from where I'm sitting on the other side of the San Francisco Bay here. And it was very successful. Something like 7 million people downloaded this screensaver. It didn't cost any money. And they were, the screensaver was fed by data that was picked up mostly at the Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico, the one that collapsed recently. Anyhow, and so when you walked away from your computer, when your fingers weren't tapping on the keys, the computer would sense that and would fire up this screensaver, SETI at Home, and reduce some of those data. It would download a chunk of those data and then, process them and send the results back to the University of California at Berkeley. There were like 7 million users, I think, of SETI at Home at the time. And it certainly gave you more computing power than any other or any previous SETI project ever had. So it was useful in that sense. It was a way to get a large amount of compute cycles, if you will, for this project. And in that, it was very successful. It was also the prototype for all sorts of other projects that have been launched in the meantime, including, folding proteins and so forth, all sorts of research projects where what you really need is a lot of compute power. So it's a model for that. And that's probably its greatest impact.
Subscribe to the Hello Computer channel here on YouTube to hear more interviews with experts as the world comes to terms with thinking machines.